And then I think my voice was also suffering. I think everything started to suffer for me.
Steve Perry, the voice that shaped a generation of rock. A man whose vocals could bring even the toughest crowd to tears, and whose relentless pursuit of perfection turned studio sessions into legend. But behind those soaring high notes and journeys, timeless anthems, stood someone who didn't just demand greatness from himself, he expected it from everyone around him. And when others didn't measure up, things could turn ugly fast, he once said. Happy songs, sad songs, this new record is part of keeping the promise. But Perry was more than just Journey's golden-throated frontman. He was a vocal purist, a control fanatic, and according to those who worked closest with him, someone who could carry a grudge longer than one of his famous falsettos. Fans adored him for the music that filled arenas and airwaves. But inside the industry, they knew another side. A man with a sharp edge who clashed with some of rock's biggest names. And tonight we pull back the curtain on those stories, Steve Perry's most explosive feuds, the rivalries that pushed him to the brink, and the 6 musicians who tested his patience like never before, from backstage meltdowns to studio confrontations. These artists learned the hard way. Crossing Steve Perry came with consequences, some that lasted for decades. Think you know the man behind the mic? Think again. This is the countdown of the 6 musicians Steve Perry couldn't stand, and the shocking reasons why their clashes helped reshape the history of rock forever. Sammy Hagar, on paper. He and Steve Perry should have been Eli's 2 vocal giants, dominating the hard rock scene of the 80s, but instead of harmony, their story became one of rivalry that split fans and critics right down the middle. It started when music journalists began comparing the two, with some claiming Hagar had the raw power Perry lacked. Perry didn't take that lightly. In a 1984 Rolling Stone interview, Perry struck back, calling Hagar a manufactured rock star who mistakes volume for emotion. That was just the beginning. Around that same time, Perry was working on Raised on Radio. While Hagar, now fronting Van Halen, was climbing the charts with Why Can't This Be Love, the 2 tracks were battling for airtime. And insiders say Perry was tracking Hagar's success obsessively, watching radio spins and chart numbers like a man possessed. When one critic claimed Hagar brought a gritty realness that Perry's voice lacked, Perry hit back hard. He mocked Hagar, saying he confused screaming with singing, and took a jab at his beer commercial hits, claiming real vocalists didn't need cheap tricks to move audiences. Hagar responded through his camp, saying Perry was so fixated on technical perfection he'd lost his soul. What followed was a months-long media Cold War, with both sides leaking comments to rock magazines. But the tension did something unexpected. It pushed Perry creatively. On Raised on Radio, he experimented with rougher vocal textures, determined to prove he could match any rock singer's fire while keeping his signature precision. Then came David Lee Roth, the living embodiment of everything Perry couldn't stand about rock and roll excess. Where Perry bled emotion into every lyric, Roth turned concerts into theatrical circus acts, filled with high kicks and exaggerated flair. The contrast between them was extreme, and their differences finally collided head-on in the early 80s. Right as MTV began reshaping the music world, the tipping point came at the 1983 U.S. festival. Journey and Van Halen were both top-billed, and the backstage atmosphere was tense. Witnesses remember Roth, still buzzing from his performance, walking up to Perry with his trademark bravado. Then came the insult. Roth mocked ballad singers, saying they hid behind pretty melodies instead of truly owning the stage. Perry's response was cold and cutting. He fired back, saying real artists didn't need costumes and circus acts to sell records. The exchange escalated quickly. Roth went on to dismiss Journey's heartfelt style as music for people who cry during commercials. That hit a nerve. Insiders say Perry became obsessed with proving he could be just as dynamic as Roth on stage. The result? Journey's Frontiers tour featured a transformed Perry, more movement, more intensity, more engagement with the crowd. He wasn't going to be outshined again. The feud lingered for years. Roth kept poking fun at emotional rock, calling it elevator music with guitars, while Perry never missed a chance to remind the world that sincerity, not showmanship, is what truly makes music timeless. The music business has always had its shallow side, And nowhere was that more obvious than in the clashing philosophies that shaped 1980s rock. It was a battle of substance versus spectacle. Raw emotion against polished entertainment. Lou Gramm, a foreigner, stood out as one of the few singers who could genuinely rival Steve Perry's place as the voice of rock, and Perry knew it. What began as mutual professional admiration quickly turned into a tense and bitter competition, one that not only split fans but also divided radio programmers and industry insiders. Their feud took root in 1982 during early talks about forming a rock supergroup featuring both singers. Record executives were excited about the idea, but the collaboration collapsed before it ever got started. According to those close to the sessions, creative tensions surfaced immediately. Graham's gritty, blues-inspired style clashed with Perry's technical, emotionally refined approach. Perry didn't hold back in his critique. He accused Graham of over-singing, performing every line as if auditioning for Broadway, and believed Graham's flair for vocal theatrics distracted from the music itself. Studio engineers who had worked with both men recalled Perry's frustration with what he described as Graham's show-off mentality. Things only got worse during the radio wars of the mid-1980s. Foreigner's Eye, Want to Know What Love Is, and Journey's Open Arms were battling for chart dominance. Perry reportedly became fixated on which track got more radio play. Some programmers even remembered getting phone calls from Perry's team questioning their playlist decisions. Graham fired back, criticizing Perry for being overly calculated, saying he seemed to measure every breath before singing. He argued that Perry's obsession with perfection stripped away the real emotion from his performances. To Grum, music was about soul, not just hitting the right notes. Ironically, this back and forth drove Perry to expand Journey's sound with more complex harmonies and arrangements, not just to prove he could keep up, but to outdo everyone. Then there was Don Henley of the Eagles, a man Perry both admired and resented. Henley represented the kind of musician who could be both artistically respected and massively successful. Perry appreciated Henley's achievements, but their relationship quickly soured over disagreements about the music industry's balance between art and profit. Their conflict started in the late 1970s as both bands were skyrocketing to fame. Perry looked up to Henley's ability to maintain creative control while selling millions of records. But during a record label meeting in 1980, Henley reportedly mocked Journey's sound and suggested Perry was just a polished voice trapped in a corporate machine. That cut deep. Perry fired back hard. He called Henley a control freak who pretended to be an artist while quietly chasing the money. Determined to prove Journey could be more than just a stadium act, Perry began obsessively reworking their songs, aiming for deeper lyrics and more artistic credibility. Even when his own band thought the tracks were already done, the rift deepened when Henley publicly criticized arena rock bands for favoring spectacle over real songwriting. Perry snapped. He called Henley a hypocrite who had sold out like everyone else, only with more arrogance. In his eyes, the Eagles made dull, self-important music for aging intellectuals. This war of ideals left a mark on Perry. It pushed him to reshape Journey's sound into something more serious and emotionally rich, especially on albums like Frontiers and Raised on Radio. But all that pressure, trying to prove Journey was more than just a hit-making machine, wore him down. It became one of the major reasons he eventually walked away from the band in the late 80s. But perhaps the most painful conflict wasn't with an outsider. It was with someone within Perry's own band, lead guitarist Neil Schon. Their relationship, once rooted in creativity and shared ambition, began to crumble into a bitter power struggle. What had been a dynamic partnership would eventually tear the heart out of Journey itself. Steve Perry walked away from music for 15 long years, and it wasn't just burnout or fading fame that pushed him out. At the heart of it all was a bitter clash over control and creativity. Perry saw himself as the soul of Journey, the man who crafted the melodies and poured emotion into every note. But his vision wasn't shared by everyone. When asked what it would be like to see him again, someone responded hesitantly, "Well, you know what? I haven't seen him in a long time." That someone was Neil Schon, a brilliant guitarist in his own right, who refused to be sidelined. Sean wasn't just there to play along with Perry's ideas. He wanted a seat at the creative table, and he demanded to be heard. Tension mounted in the studio. Engineers remember sessions growing hostile, with Perry insisting that every guitar solo had to serve the song. But Sean pushed back, wanting space to express himself and let his talent shine. Their collaboration, once electric, had turned into a battlefield. During the trial by fire recordings in the mid-90s, things finally exploded. Producer Kevin Shirley witnessed Perry lashing out, accusing Sean of putting ego above emotion, sabotaging the music just to show off. Sean fired back, accusing Perry of becoming a control freak who couldn't share the spotlight. Behind the scenes, it got even uglier. Perry felt stabbed in the back when Sean aligned with management on key business decisions. To Perry it was clear Sean had chosen profits over passion, favoring sold-out tours over creative evolution. But Sean didn't hold back either. He painted Perry as impossible someone, more obsessed with his public image than making great music. The emotional fallout was massive. Perry, a perfectionist to his core, simply couldn't take the constant battles with someone he'd once trusted like a brother. Their friendship and artistic partnership had become so toxic that he walked away. He'd rather give up his career than keep waging war inside the band. And that decision didn't just end Journey's golden age, it nearly destroyed Perry's love for music altogether. Sometimes, the deepest wounds aren't caused by enemies. They come from the people closest to you. And then there was Kevin Cronin. Most fans never knew it, but the lead singer of REO Speedwagon was Perry's biggest rival. They ruled the same airwaves, their voices echoing in every car stereo and stadium. But behind the scenes, it was personal. This wasn't just about chart positions, it was a collision of styles, pride, and ego. Their feud kicked off in the late 70s, just as both bands were on the rise. Industry insiders recall the moment it began at a Midwest radio station where both groups were promoting new albums. Perry overheard Cronin criticizing Journey, calling their sound too polished, and claiming California bands didn't understand real rock the way Midwestern musicians did. Perry was livid. He didn't just shrug it off, he declared war. In interviews, he picked apart Cronin's technique, calling him an amateur who confused raw emotion with real skill. Studio insiders say Perry became obsessed. Every time REO Speedwagon released a track, Perry was in the studio, determined to top it, perfecting his vocals to the last breath. Things got even more intense in the early 80s during the Power Ballad Wars. REO's Can't Fight This Feeling and Journey's Open Arms battled for airplay supremacy. Perry wasn't just watching, he was obsessing. Label execs say they got constant calls from Perry's team, demanding answers whenever REO pulled ahead. On tour, the Cold War turned visible. Promoters saw it all. Perry wouldn't even look at Cronin backstage. He insisted on separate rehearsal times. And when REO soundchecked, Perry would time his warm-ups to show off, belting out notes just loud enough for Cronin to hear. It wasn't just rivalry, it was psychological warfare. And yet, that fire, that need to prove himself, pushed Perry to his absolute limit. He refined his voice into something sharp, clear, and unforgettable. Ironically, his obsession with beating Cronin gave birth to some of Journey's most iconic performances. The very thing he hated inspired his greatest work. These rivalries didn't just shape Steve Perry, they helped create rock history. His perfectionism, his grudges, his battles, they're the reason we still sing those songs today. Which of these feuds surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stories from the legends of rock.